Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 2012 to 2013 series Team 7, part of DC's The New 52. As you'll recall, if you at least watched my Flashpoint video, that story ended with Flash breaking across universes while looking for his original timeline. A mysterious lady narrated his travels for us, indicating that the main DC universe would be united with what had, over time, become a separate Vertigo universe. But more than that, it was also being united with the Wildstorm universe, as DC had acquired the comic studio and this was their chance to really do something with that. With this New 52 reboot though, DC decided not to start at the beginning. Instead, they set the formation of the Justice League, the point where the world had to acknowledge the existence of superhumans, as being 5 years in the past. This was a big advantage for DC because it left room for them to keep certain parts of their history and toss out other parts as they saw fit. But it was also a disadvantage for readers who might get lost trying to figure out what all was supposed to have happened in those intervening 5 years. Some comics did come out to help explain that. Largely this was in the form of the Zero issues, which for the most part jumped back in time those 5 years to give us an idea of how each of these characters got their start. There would also be some series that were set all or part in the past, like the first few story arcs of Action Comics, or this comic. But even for Wildstorm fans, Team 7 might be a bit obscure. Though they did get their own comic at one point, they were really just the backstory for the teenage superhero group Gen 13. The fact that there's no New 52 Gen 13 comic should tell you how different a direction this series takes from the original. But this Team 7 does have one important thing in common with their namesake, and that's that they'll be used as background for superheroes of the present day. So let's go back to the past and see where that takes us as we take this away. The comic opens on putting the band back together. Except I guess they've never actually been together. So putting the band together for the first time, for the last time. Yeah. The band is being put together by this guy, John Lynch, who was an original member of Team 7 when it was still a Wildstorm comic. But now he's being more of an equivalent to the MCU Nick Fury, speaking to the World Security Council, warning mysterious benefactors that a super team needs to be created to protect the world from the growing number of unregulated super people. Important to note that this whole comic is set, as it says, 5 years ago, with the concept of this being set around the same time as many of those New 52 Zero issues or other such early comics. In fact, it directly references the first story arc of Action Comics as a recent event to give us a time frame. The first members of our team are husband and wife team Dinah Drake and Kurt Lance. We saw them in my last video on the Birds of Prey. Interesting to note that the New 52 seems to return Black Canary back to her original person of Dinah Drake, who in this continuity becomes Dinah Lance by marrying Kurt Lance, whose first name is no longer Larry because I guess alliteration has fallen out of fashion in the New 52. I say after having said Dinah Drake. Whatever. As I said, we saw even further backstory from these two during Birds of Prey. That's actually where we learn most that we learn about them. The tie-in that series had with the Zero Year event, which was yet another of DC's backstory flashbacks, saw Dinah Drake get recruited by Lynch straight from the mean streets of Gotham. We aren't shown how Kurt got recruited, but we do see some of his early interactions with Dinah in other flashbacks during Birds of Prey. If I understand correctly, at this point they are a couple, but not yet married, which is why she's still Dinah Drake, not Dinah Lance as she's known in Birds of Prey. Lynch sends the couple out to recruit the rest of the team for him. First up, they travel to an underwater base for some underworld arms dealer guy who seems to currently be peddling Gen Factor, a reference to the substance that gave people superpowers in the original Wildstorm universe. And sorry to disappoint, but it won't come up again in this comic. I can't help but wonder if this line was intended to be the beginning of a thread that would have become a major part of the comic, but it doesn't. Instead of that, we just see Dinah calling in some debt to two of the man's bodyguards. And those bodyguards include Slade Wilson, who will one day become known as the merciless mercenary Deathstroke. But for now, ain't that. He still must be a pretty big effing deal if Lynch has sent his best people just to collect him from his boring bodyguard job, though. And the other bodyguard is Alex Fairchild, father of Caitlin Fairchild, who was one of the primary faces of the Wildstorm comic Gen 13, as well as being a part of the original Team 7 himself. Wilson and Fairchild turn against their employer and join with Lynch on his new team, and Dinah heads off to meet with a guy named James Bronson. Bronson is the overachiever type, it would seem, always pushing for a bigger goal, and is both sort of a new character and a returning Wildstorm character. But I'll explain what I mean by that later in the video. Next up to join is cocky pilot Summer Ramos, who will barely be in the comic at all, so I'm not really going to talk about her. So our next recruit is Cole Cash, who will later become known as Grifter. Grifter was one of the bigger successes of Wildstorm, appearing in Wildcats as well as his own series both during the Wildstorm days and in the New 52. He's also, along with Fairchild and Lynch, one of the only returning members of the original Team 7. Our final recruit is a face that should be familiar to everyone here, one Amanda Waller. Waller, of course, would be the eventual head of Task Force X, better known as the Suicide Squad. She, of course, had to be here, as we'll be treating Team 7 as a sort of proto-Task Force X. Currently, though, Waller is an NSA analyst in the field for some reason to stop some terrorists from blowing up a baseball stadium with a bomb, and maybe also by crashing a blimp into it, in case the bomb thing didn't work out. It's just always remarkable to me how fueled by 9/11 so much of the New 52 was. You know, the thing that happened a full decade before the New 52 started. It's also funny that literally both of the first introductions we have of Waller, here and in Suicide Squad, involve her dealing with terrorist attacks on sports stadiums. What's up with that? With Waller on the blimp mission was a guy named Dean Higgins, on loan I guess from military intelligence, who is also drafted into Team 7. He's a completely brand new character and will spend most of the comic in the background on this already overloaded team. They don't even seem to be able to decide on a race for him, as he seems to start out as seemingly a black guy, and for the rest of the comic will be pretty white. Even the series colorist couldn't give a crap about this guy. He's that vanilla. The team is given their own, spaceship thing, I guess, and their own corporate logo that Waller will even wear on a hat just in case the title becomes popular and DC can sell some merch. Buy Waller's sweet new hat, yours for the low price of only $49.99. I mean, they're supposed to be a super top secret military strike force, so why wouldn't they wear their brand logo on full display? Finally all gathered together, their team goes on their first mission to this giant floating prison in the sky called, get this, the Float. This is what you get when you let the government name things. The Float is a sort of test case, an early attempt at making a supervillain prison, since it floats and is self-powered to prevent possible blackouts and would obviously be harder to break into or out of being, up in the sky and all. It should be able to contain a new class of criminal. The only problem is, they've lost all contact with it. So Team 7 is sent in to investigate, and after taking pretty much the entire first issue just to get inside, seriously, they spend most of the issue just standing around outside and arguing, they discover the prison is empty, except for a single survivor. She, it turns out, though, is infected by something that turns her evil. And pretty much the second she turns, they kill her. Because, as they feel the need to literally point out to us, they're not the good guys. They're army guys. Go Joe! Whatever it was that happened to this first woman seems to have affected the entire prison, and the team soon finds themselves in a zombie movie surrounded by these guys with kind of familiar two-colored faces. It seems that one Dr. Alex Montez, a name that should be familiar if you've been watching my last few videos, was experimenting on prisoners of the root beer float with a Jekyll formula. A reference, of course, to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, not just the book, but also a character that has long existed in DC continuity. This formula was supposed to make prisoners more docile, but instead it painted them up like football fans and made them act like their team just lost the World Cup. Yes, I mixed American football and soccer in that metaphor. So sue me, I'm not a sports guy. While most of the two-color zombies die from bullets, the original test patient, who is apparently running the show and has taken Montez captive, is a bit stronger. He's resistant to bullets and blades, though not to robot punches. Bronson drives a robot suit, I guess I didn't mention that. Montez says the creature might be weak to certain frequencies of light, and so the team uses a device to test that theory, and it works. But before being knocked out, the creature had set the float on a course for a place called Sentinel Island. I'm assuming this is a reference to North Sentinel Island, a location with a deliberately isolationist indigenous population that has been known for violent confrontations with outsiders, because the place Team 7 ends up is home to an isolated native population that they fully expect to be violent. Only there has already been someone on the island who killed most of the local tribe, which makes those guys the bad guys. Even though Team 7 would definitely have also killed the entire local tribe. But they would have felt bad about it. Well, some of them. Maybe. The other team on the island, if I understand correctly, is part of Basilisk, that snake-themed group I've been mentioning for my past few New 52 reviews. And you guys thought I was just picking comics at random, but no, they're all connected. I don't know what you thought, I'm just kidding. They've been sent here for presumably the same reason that Team 7 has, for the Heart of Darkness being kept on the island, the secret gym prison of Eclipso. The Gym World guy, from my Sword of Sorcery review. You remember that, right? With the help of the mysterious ghostly character Essence, who we'll see more of when I finally force myself to cover Red Hood and the Outlaws, Team 7 manages to follow the Basilisk team through the other spiritual guardians of the island and reach the gym prison of Eclipso. In an effort to stop the Basilisk team from getting their hands on the gem, Slade grabs it and immediately gets possessed by Eclipso himself. As Eclipso, he attacks the rest of the team, but Essence creates a new crystal to store him in if they can get him out of Slade. So Fairchild deals the possessed Slade a nearly fatal wound in the chest, literally stabbing him in the back. And Eclipso immediately ghosts on out of there. He then tries to possess Grifter, but Grifter uses the stone Essence created to capture Eclipso instead, ending this story as quickly as it started. Slade then seems to have an almost miraculously fast healing time from the giant chest wound, something even noted by his teammate Fairchild, who, you know, did the stabbing, so maybe he's more apt to notice. The quick healing could potentially have something to do with something called Project Majestic, that Lynch came to talk to Slade about while he was in the hospital. Slade isn't given much time to heal because there's a new disaster exploding at a place called the Advanced Prosthetic Research Center, which happens to be where Caitlin Fairchild, as I've mentioned, the daughter of Team 7 member Alex Fairchild, happens to work. We already knew she existed in universe because Fairchild mentioned having a daughter earlier. And I know I also mentioned it earlier, but I feel like all this stuff is super forgettable. Is it not super forgettable? Is it just me? Caitlin is working on helping a disabled army vet named Max, who might be familiar to Wildstorm fans as the character Ladytron. But here she isn't quite at that stage yet. They do give a little nod to her name though, basing it here off the Britpop band of the same name. Though my guess would be that originally, if anything, her name was based on the Roxy Music song. Also working at the APRC is one Dr. Hinshaw, because this specific issue seems to be just crammed full of references. Hinshaw, you'll remember if you saw my Death and Return of Superman videos, was a scientist who became an android and later the cyborg Superman, with a little nod to that factoid right here when he gets his eye scanned. For further references in this issue, there's also Caitlin and Ladytron, as I mentioned, a really forced reference to Deathstroke's missing eye, and what seems to be a reference to the comic We 3 and its psychopathic bunny with this little guy. Who's the fluffiest little murder machine? Yes, you are. Yet another reference is Hinshaw's secret project in the lab, a fully robotic body that he calls Spartan, a nod to the robotic character of the same name from Wildcats. All we learn about this Spartan is that he was badly damaged and I guess discovered underground or something, and suddenly he seems to come to life. We then cut to Team 7 arriving on the scene disastrously, being shot out of the sky, and Summer Ramos dying while trying to land their carrier. Oh no. And we were learning so much about her in her literal 17 panels that she appears in out of the entire 9-issue comic, with one of those being after she's already dead. Inside the facility, everyone seems to have been converted into robots, which is why that robot bunny, and that even includes Caitlin Fairchild, who straight up murders her own father due to being controlled by a hive mind by the Spartan. So yeah, really sealing that there won't be a Gen 13 comic. The only one to escape the hive mind was Hinshaw, who was somehow protected by his private workspace, but he still died and was forced to download his consciousness into a robot body, so he could still become the cyborg Superman if we needed that. Although my viewers will know that the new 52 version of that character would become Zor-El, Supergirl's father. Although I don't feel this next part is very clear at all, I think what they basically failed to explain to us about the next set of events is that Spartan was reactivated by Basilisk, who then created the emergency with the specific intent of drawing in Team 7. Apparently Basilisk wanted Bronson out of everyone else on the team, except he didn't come on the mission because he was on leave with his family. So Spartan, tired of waiting, already left the facility and appears in Bronson's home, where he just seems to explode, killing the man's family, but apparently also mutating Bronson into Mr. Majestic. It even changed his clothing. How fancy! Majestic was another Wildstorm hero, an intentional knockoff of Superman. Originally, he was a member of one of Wildstorm's alien races, but here has been reimagined as a human named James Bronson for some reason. I guess so the Majestic thing could be a surprise? I don't really know. But this is what I meant earlier when I said that he is both a new and returning character. Creating a super being like Majestic was always the goal for Team 7, we're told, and with him now activated, the story again immediately shifts away from the plotline it was on into a story where the remainder of Team 7 attacks the island nation of Gamorra, home to Basilisk. Because the Basilisk leader, one Kaizen Gamorra, has gotten his grubby little hands on Pandora's box. That's the golden skull thing there. It's a box. Or that's what they call it anyway. While attacking Gamorra, Team 7 is hit with a vision of the future, courtesy of a Minority Report reference. No, seriously. The Kaizen literally has 3 little bald precogs that float in a milky white bath and predict the future for him. But those 3 are concerned about Pandora's box and show Team 7 what is supposed to be a post-apocalyptic future. Although all it really just shows is Grifter, Slade, and Black Canary in their present-day outfits, while Majestic battles a mysterious woman. That mysterious woman is Pandora herself, she of the box. The skull box. We've seen her before as that mysterious cosmic lady voice that led Barry Allen through the multiverse at the end of Flashpoint, as I mentioned in the intro. We'll see a lot more of her and her box when I cover the Trinity War crossover when I start getting into the new 52 Justice League. I'll also definitely cover her solo series that she got during the new 52. But we've also seen her in all 52 issue 1s that were part of the first wave of DC New 52 titles. Last week in Birds of Prey, we saw her hanging out in the darkness when Dinah went to visit Batgirl to ask if she wanted to join the BOP. In the first issue of Firestorm, she stood on the roof of Jason and Ronnie's school as the two battled for the first time as Firestorm. In Action Comics, she was on that train that Lex Luthor derailed in an effort to capture Superman. In Static Shock, she was peering in Virgil's living room window like a creeper. I'm not going to go through all 52 appearances right now, though maybe I'll make a video for that one day, but my point is simply that she is a big deal, but we don't actually deal with her right now. Instead, horrified by the vision, Majestic flies up into space and then comes crashing back down to Earth with such force that he creates a tidal wave to flood the entire island nation. Only the upper floors of the Kaizen's tower are spared, where Team 7 battles the Kaizen to try and prevent him from opening Pandora's box. The team also begins learning that they too have developed superpowers, with Dinah Drake suddenly exploding with her first canary cry, and Kurt Lance discovering he can both heighten and dampen powers. In case it's unclear, the idea here is that, much like with the original Team 7, the government was essentially experimenting on this team while they were active to try and get them to produce superpowers. Lynch says at one point that every single one of them has the metagene that should allow them to produce superpowers. which means even Waller has the potential to gain superpowers, but I guess she doesn't? Majestic, back from flooding the island and killing millions, shows up to attack the Kaizen and ends up stealing Pandora's box for himself. But Dinah, with Kurt's help, creates a canary cry so powerful that it knocks out Majestic and destroys what's left of the Kaizen's tower, burying most of the rest of the team. The only survivors we see are Dinah Drake, Amanda Waller, and John Lynch, who had joined them on this mission in place of Fairchild, I guess. But we all know that they really all survived, seeing as every one of them has by this point appeared in later stories, most of which I've covered by now. Also, the final page of the comic informs us that they've survived. Lynch wants Pandora's box for himself and tries to claim it, but Waller takes control of the situation and rips it away from him, sticking it in another box and giving it to Dinah to take away. Lynch tries to stop her from escaping, revealing that he too has developed metahuman powers, so Waller simply puts a bullet through his brain to stop him. And that, believe it or not, is where the comic ends, all sudden like that. So that just leaves us with the breakdown. This comic is a mess. It's hard enough to do flashbacks or prequels effectively, and here it honestly feels like they just didn't really try. Combining the Wildstorm and DC universes into a single continuity, when they already both had so much history and story deliberately dividing them, was always going to be difficult. But rather than try to find some clever ways of making that happen, this comic seemed to take the approach of, well, what if we just mashed it all together and see what happens? What we end up with is something that feels like a fan-made fan service blender of Wildstorm and DC references that don't have any reason to go together and don't really add anything to the history of the New 52. If this was how DC was going to handle the backstory of their new universe, they would have probably been better off just not doing that. I've read better comics from Justin Jordan and Tony Bedard, who helped write the final issue of the series, so I don't blame them. The art is pretty all over the place as well, probably from the wide range of artists that worked on the series and what I'd guess were last-minute editorial changes to the stories to prevent some contradiction or another. From beginning to end, there's just no part of this comic that doesn't feel like a bigger mess than needed to be made. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of low. It's not like it's terrible, but I just don't feel like there's any real reason for anyone to read this comic, no matter how big of a Wildcats fan you were, or how much you want more of the history of the New 52. The collected edition gets 1. Team 7 logo, which I'm going with being a pretty good thing. They put all 9 issues into one volume, and included a brief alternate cover gallery and an equally brief but pretty good sketchbook. There are definitely worse things about this comic than the collection that it got. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I know this is a pretty obscure title that many of you probably don't even know existed, but then again, sometimes when I think nobody's going to watch a video, everyone watches it, so I just don't know what you guys want from me. Maybe you can let me know by leaving me a comment. I always appreciate hearing from you guys. You could also, like and subscribe, because those are YouTube things that people do, I'm assuming. I appreciate it. It helps me and the channel, and it'll help you to make sure that you can be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.